I let an alien girl take my escape pod seat. Years later, she came back for me. The war had raged on for years, its impact spreading across galaxies and civilizations. Jason, a young soldier in the Earth Defense Fleet, had seen more battles than he cared to remember. His ship, the Pride of Earth, had been one of the last to leave the front lines as the enemy closed in. The starships were being shot down one after another, and now only the escape pods remained as humanity's last hope. Jason sat in the cockpit of his damaged fighter, staring at the distant stars. He was alone, surrounded by the noise of alarms and flickering lights. The enemy was relentless, and the situation seemed hopeless. He had been in many battles before, but this one felt different. The enemy was fierce, and their numbers seemed endless. "Evacuate! All personnel, evacuate the ship!" The voice over the intercom was calm, almost detached, but Jason could feel the tension. They didn't have much time. The escape pods were waiting, but there weren't enough for everyone. Jason knew that many would be left behind, but he didn't think it would be him. He had a seat in one of the pods, a guaranteed place to escape the destruction, or so he thought. As he moved to the exit, a figure caught his eye. A young alien girl, no older than 16, stumbled down the hallway. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she looked lost, confused. Her species had been caught up in the war as well, and now, like the rest of them, she was running for her life. "Help me," she pleaded in a trembling voice, her hands reaching out to him. She was clearly not one of the Earth forces. Her green skin, wide black eyes, and delicate features were unmistakable. Jason had never seen her species before, but she was clearly just as frightened as the rest of them. Jason hesitated. The pod was just down the hall, and he had to get to it. But looking at the alien girl, he saw something that struck him. She wasn't just afraid for herself, she was afraid for her life. And yet she was alone. I don't know where to go," she stammered. "Can you help me, please?" Jason was torn. He knew the rules. Every soldier had a duty, and his was to survive so he could keep fighting. But the thought of leaving this helpless alien girl behind to fend for herself in a war zone felt wrong. For a moment, he just stood there, unsure of what to do. The ship's alarms were still blaring in the background, the sounds of metal groaning and cracks in the hull echoing through the ship. Jason's mind raced. He had to survive. He had to get to the pod. But then he looked at the girl again. She was looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. The same fear he had felt earlier reflected in her gaze. She didn't have anyone. He did. Without thinking, Jason stepped forward, pushing the thought of his own escape aside. "You can take my seat," he said, his voice firm though his hands trembled. "Get to the pod, I'll hold them off." The girl's eyes widened. "But no time for buts," Jason interrupted, his voice taking on a tone of urgency. "Go." Without a word, she nodded and ran past him, heading toward the escape pod at the end of the corridor. Jason watched her go, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. He turned back to the cockpit and looked at the remaining pods. His seat was gone now. He didn't have time to waste. If he didn't act fast, he wouldn't survive. Jason sprinted down the hallway after the girl, but by the time he reached the airlock, the pod had already launched. It disappeared into the endless void of space, its engines glowing bright before vanishing into the distance. Jason stood there for a moment, the realization sinking in. He was stranded, but there was no turning back. He couldn't abandon his duty now, not when so many had already given their lives. He was trained for this. Survival, even in the face of impossible odds, was part of who he was. He turned away from the pod's departure and made his way toward the bridge, where the remaining crew members were gathered. The ship's captain, a woman named Evelyn, was barking orders, trying to get the ship under control. Jason joined her, standing tall as he looked out into the vastness of space. "Jason, we're going to make it through this," Evelyn said, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We'll fight back." Jason nodded, though he wasn't so sure. The odds were stacked against them, but he couldn't give up. Not now, not after what he had done. Hours passed as the ship limped its way through the battlefield, the sounds of explosions growing louder with each passing moment. Jason and the remaining crew fought with everything they had, but eventually they were overrun. The Pride of Earth was doomed. Jason knew it. He could feel it in his bones, but as he held his ground, protecting the last line of defense, he couldn't help but think of the alien girl. What had happened to her? Had she made it to safety? Did she survive the battle? With a final, deafening explosion, the lights went out. Jason's world went dark. When he awoke, it was to the sounds of distant voices and the cold emptiness of space. The enemy had won, and Jason was left alone to face the consequences of his actions. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could carry on. He would survive just like he always had. But as the days turned into weeks and the war raged on, Jason couldn't stop thinking about the alien girl. Where was she now? Had she remembered him? Had she survived? He didn't know the answer. But one thing was certain, he would never forget her. And somehow, some way, they would meet again. Jason had lived through many battles, but nothing felt quite like the emptiness he carried after the pride of Earth fell. The war had taken everything, but what weighed on him the most was the memory of the alien girl. He had no idea what had happened to her after he let her take his seat on the escape pod. After that day, Jason was one of the few soldiers who had survived. The rest of the crew, his friends, his comrades, they were gone. Earth's fleet had been decimated, and humanity's chances of winning the war seemed impossible. Jason had been taken to a distant space station, a refugee among the last survivors. The war had changed the galaxy, and for years, Jason had to rebuild not just his life, but humanity's place in a galaxy that seemed less welcoming with each passing day. But there was no escaping the thoughts of that day. Every night, Jason found himself staring at the stars, wondering about the girl. Had she found safety? Was she living in a world free from the war's destruction? Jason hadn't had much hope for the future, but his thoughts often drifted back to her, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made the right choice. He had given his seat, his chance at survival, to someone who needed it more. He had no regrets about that. But he couldn't stop wondering if she was alive. Years passed, and the war raged on, but the battles were far from the front lines Jason had known. He became a leader in the Earth resistance, fighting against enemy forces that were still overwhelming. The enemy's advanced technology, their ruthless tactics, and their sheer numbers made it feel like Earth was always on the brink of defeat. But Jason had become a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope for those who still believed they could fight back. Despite the hardships, Jason never stopped pushing forward. He trained new recruits, planned missions, and organized attacks against the enemy. His personal feelings, the confusion, the memories, and the loss, all of it had to be buried beneath the weight of his responsibilities. But there were nights, quiet moments when the world was still, when Jason found himself staring out at the stars, wondering if there was something more. One day, Jason received an unexpected message. It came through the Resistance's secure communication channel, marked with a code Jason recognized instantly. It was from the alien girl. Her message was brief but clear. "I owe you my life. I will find you." Jason's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced. It was her. After all these years, she was reaching out to him. But why now? What had happened to her in the time since they had parted ways? He stared at the message, unsure of what to do. The connection between them had always been one of kindness, one of a moment shared between two people caught in the chaos of war. But now, it seemed like more. It felt like fate, like the universe had brought them together again for a reason. But Jason couldn't deny that he was unsure. What if she had changed? What if the war had turned her into someone he didn't recognize? Still, he couldn't ignore the pull he felt. He knew he had to meet her. There was too much at stake. For years, he had lived with the memory of her, wondering if she had made it out alive. Now she was looking for him. The message had come from a neutral zone, a planet not controlled by either side of the war. It was a place of refuge, a place where people from all walks of life could find shelter from the violence that had torn the galaxy apart. Jason gathered a small group of soldiers and made the decision to go. If there was even a chance of finding her, he had to take it. The journey was long and dangerous. The neutral zones were not as safe as they appeared, and the enemy still had a strong presence in some of these areas. Jason had been to these zones before, but this time it felt different. This time he wasn't just trying to survive. He was searching for someone he had saved all those years ago. And he was beginning to realize that this wasn't just about the war, it was about something more. When Jason arrived on the planet, he was struck by how much had changed. The city was bustling with refugees and traders, people from all over the galaxy trying to rebuild their lives. It was a strange contrast to the war-ravaged worlds Jason had come from. Here, it felt like there was still hope. Jason made his way through the crowded streets, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know where to start, but he had to try. He contacted the local resistance, asking for any information they might have on her. It took hours, but eventually they gave him a name: Lissa. She had been living in a nearby district, working to help rebuild a broken community. The news was unexpected, but Jason didn't care. He had to find her. After what felt like an eternity, Jason arrived at the place where Lissa was supposed to be. It was a modest building, surrounded by smaller homes and shops. It looked ordinary, but Jason's senses were on edge. He didn't know what he expected, but the moment he stepped into the building, everything changed. She was there. Standing in the middle of the room, her presence undeniable. Jason had expected to find a girl, someone like the one he had helped years ago. But the woman before him was not the same. She had grown, both in age and strength. Her once delicate features had sharpened, and her eyes, though still the same deep black, carried a weight of wisdom and power. She was no longer a frightened girl, but a leader in her own right. "Jason," she said, her voice steady and calm. "It's been a long time." Jason felt his heart race as he took in the sight of her. She was real. She had survived. She was standing there before him. He had thought about this moment for years, but now that it was happening, he didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lissa stepped forward, her eyes softening. "You saved me," she said quietly. "I never forgot that. I've spent years searching for you." Jason swallowed hard. The flood of emotions, the years of wondering, the guilt of leaving his comrades behind, all of it came rushing back. But now, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she was here and they had found each other again. "Lissa," Jason finally said, his voice hoarse, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." She smiled, though it was a smile filled with both sadness and strength. "You should never have had to." Jason didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change. And he couldn't wait to see where it would take him. Jason stood in the doorway, his eyes locked on Lissa. It was impossible for him to fully grasp the reality of the moment. The girl he had once saved, the alien girl he had offered his escape pod seat to so many years ago, was now standing before him as a strong, confident leader. The transformation was striking. No longer the frightened young girl, she had become a force of nature. She smiled softly, her expression a mix of warmth and sorrow. "It's been a long time, Jason," she said, her voice steady, though there was a note of something deeper in it, something that spoke of the pain she had carried all these years. Jason didn't know what to say. His heart raced as memories flooded his mind, of the moment he'd made the decision to give up his seat, of the uncertainty he'd felt afterward. It had been an act of kindness, but one that had left him with more questions than answers. And now, standing here before her, those questions were rushing back. "You've changed," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lissa nodded, her eyes looking past him as if she could see the years that had passed. "We both have." Jason swallowed hard. "You've become someone important?" Lissa smiled, but it wasn't the smile of the girl he remembered. This was the smile of a leader, someone who had fought for survival and come out stronger for it. "I suppose I have. After you saved me, I couldn't sit idly by. My people, we were lost. I couldn't just forget what you did for me." Jason's heart swelled, a strange warmth filling his chest. He had never expected anything in return for his decision all those years ago. But to hear that she had remembered him, that his simple act of kindness had shaped the course of her life, was something he hadn't prepared for. "I didn't think you'd remember me," Jason admitted. I thought I was just another soldier to you. Another face in a war that we all wanted to forget." Lissa's expression softened. She stepped closer, her gaze intense but gentle. "You were never just another soldier to me. You gave up your chance to survive for me. No one has ever done something like that for me." It changed everything. Jason looked down at his hands, feeling a sense of disbelief. He had never understood the impact of that decision until now. In that moment, it seemed so small, so simple, but the weight of it was far greater than he had ever imagined. The room between them felt charged with the energy of years of unspoken thoughts. Jason had always wondered if his decision had meant anything, if it had truly mattered in the grand scheme of things. But now, hearing Lissa's words, he realized it had meant the world to her. And somehow that made everything feel different. "Where do we go from here?" Jason asked, his voice steady but his mind racing. Lissa's eyes darkened for a moment, as if she were seeing something far beyond the walls of the room. "The war isn't over, we both know that. But what I've built here, it's only the beginning. My people were rebuilding, yes, but we need help, we need the strength of humanity." Jason felt a rush of uncertainty. "I don't understand, why come to me, why now?" Lissa walked over to the small window, looking out at the city beyond. It was peaceful, but Jason could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air. Because I need you, Jason. I've spent years leading my people, but there's only so much I can do alone. Your resistance, your experience, it's exactly what we need. Jason shook his head, unsure of what she was asking. I'm just a soldier. I've spent years fighting a war that's taking everything. I don't know if I can help you build something new. Lissa turned back to face him, her expression firm. It's not about fighting anymore. We need to rebuild what we've lost, and we can't do it alone. Your people, you've seen what it takes to survive. You've faced losses that most can't even imagine. That's the kind of strength we need. Jason took a deep breath, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. The war had taken everything from him. His friends, his comrades, the sense of hope he had once carried, it was all gone. He had buried his feelings deep inside, focusing on what was necessary to keep going. But now, here in front of him, was a chance to do something different. Lissa was offering him a way out of the endless cycle of violence, a way to build something better. I don't know, Jason said, his voice filled with doubt. I've seen what war does to people. I've seen how it breaks them. I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep fighting. Lissa stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with conviction. It's not about fighting anymore. It's about survival. It's about protecting what we have left. You gave me your seat because you believed in survival. You believed in doing the right thing. That's what I need now. That's what we need. For a moment, Jason didn't know what to say. The weight of her words settled into his chest, heavy but real. He had never thought about it that way. The war had become a fight for survival, but it had also become a fight for something more. And now, standing in front of Lissa, Jason felt something stir deep within him, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I don't know what you've built here, Jason said, his voice stronger now, but I'm willing to help. If it's what you need, I'll stand with you. Lissa smiled, the kind of smile that spoke of both gratitude and relief. I knew you would. Jason's mind spun with the possibilities. Helping Lissa meant more than just fighting a war. It meant helping rebuild a future. It meant standing side by side with someone who had once been a stranger, but who had now become a symbol of resilience and strength. The next few days were a blur. Jason worked with Lissa and her people to coordinate plans for the future. They discussed strategies, ways to unite the different factions that had once been at war, and how to protect the planet they were rebuilding. It wasn't easy. Tensions were high, and many people were reluctant to trust outsiders. But Jason's presence, his experience, and Lissa's leadership slowly began to make a difference. As the days turned into weeks, Jason found himself growing closer to Lissa, not just as a leader, but as someone he could rely on. They worked together, making difficult decisions and sharing their hopes for the future. It wasn't easy, but it was something Jason had never thought possible. He was part of something bigger than the war now. He was part of a chance for peace. But even as they worked to rebuild, Jason knew that the war wasn't over. There were still enemies out there, enemies who would stop at nothing to see everything destroyed. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Jason felt a spark of hope. With Lissa by his side, he felt like they might actually have a chance to make a difference. The days blurred together for Jason as he worked alongside Lissa to help rebuild the fragile peace they had started to create. Despite the progress, the feeling of uncertainty never fully left him. The galaxy, scarred by war, was not an easy place to find peace. But with Lissa, Jason began to believe it might be possible. He found himself drawn to her strength, her leadership, and the way she carried the weight of her people's future without ever faltering. They spent countless hours together, discussing strategies, negotiating with leaders from other factions, and organizing efforts to bring stability to the planet. Jason noticed the way the people responded to Lissa, how they looked to her not just for leadership, but for hope. She had become a beacon of light in a galaxy that had seen too much darkness. One evening, as they sat together after a long day of meetings, Lissa turned to Jason with a thoughtful expression on her face. You've come a long way, Jason. I don't think I ever really thanked you properly for what you did. You gave me a chance when you didn't have to. You saved my life, and that's something I'll never forget. Jason looked at her, his mind drifting back to that moment when he had made the decision to give up his seat on the escape pod. It seemed like a lifetime ago, yet the choice had been so simple. I didn't think twice about it, he said quietly. It was the right thing to do. Lissa nodded, her expression softening. I've always believed that our choices define us, and that was one of the most important choices I've ever made, to remember what you did to make sure I honored it. Jason didn't know what to say. There was so much he wanted to ask, so much he wanted to understand about her journey, about everything she had been through since that fateful day. But the truth was, he didn't need to ask. Lissa's actions spoke louder than words ever could. I never expected this, Jason finally said, looking out the window at the distant stars. I never imagined I'd be part of something like this, something that could change the future. Lissa joined him at the window, her gaze focused on the horizon. None of us ever expect it, Jason. We're just living our lives and then the world changes around us. We have to make the choice to adapt or be lost to it. Jason looked at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had made choices before, ones that had saved his life, ones that had cost him everything. But now, standing next to Lissa, he felt as though he was part of something greater than himself. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a chance to rebuild, to create something lasting. The next few days were filled with discussions about the future. They worked tirelessly to unite different factions, to convince leaders from both sides of the war to set aside their differences and focus on the future. It wasn't easy. Many were still wary of each other, haunted by the wounds of the past. But Jason and Lissa's bond became the symbol of what was possible, a reminder that even in the darkest times, people could find common ground. One evening, as they met with a group of leaders from neighboring systems, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They had made some progress, but there were still many who resisted change, many who believed that peace was an impossible dream. Lissa noticed the concern on his face and placed a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" Jason looked at her, his eyes filled with frustration. "It feels like we're fighting a losing battle. We can talk about peace all we want, but some people don't want it. They don't believe it's possible." Lissa's expression softened, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know, but you have to remember change doesn't come easy. It's always hardest right before it happens. We have to keep pushing, we can't give up now." Jason nodded, but the weight of the situation still pressed down on him. He had seen too much of what war could do to people. He had seen what it could do to their hearts. And now, as he stood alongside Lissa, he wondered if they could truly make a difference. If peace could really take root in a galaxy that had known nothing but conflict for so long. That night, as Jason lay in his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. There was still so much to be done, and yet the challenges ahead seemed even more daunting. The peaceful future they were trying to build felt like a fragile dream, something that could be shattered at any moment. The next morning, Jason was called into a meeting with Lissa. When he entered the room, she was already there, her face grave. "We have a problem," she said, her voice steady but filled with concern. "I've received word that a faction from the enemy side is planning an attack on this planet. They don't want peace. They want to destroy everything we've worked for." Jason's stomach dropped. "How serious is it?" "Very serious," Lissa replied, her eyes narrowing with determination. "They've already begun mobilizing their forces. We don't have much time." Jason felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as he prepared himself for the battle ahead. It was always like this. Peace was never easy to come by. Every time they thought they had reached a point where the fighting might stop, the enemy would strike again. He had known this day would come, but that didn't make it any easier. "We'll fight them together," Jason said, his voice firm. "We can't let them take this from us." Lissa nodded, a look of determination in her eyes. "We'll do whatever it takes, but we need your help, Jason. We need your expertise in the field." Jason felt a surge of purpose. He had fought in countless battles, but this time it was different. This time he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something bigger. He was fighting for the future that Lissa and so many others had worked to create. The preparation for the battle began immediately. Jason and Lissa worked together, gathering troops, organizing defenses, and preparing for the worst. The threat was real, and they couldn't afford to take it lightly. They had to be ready for whatever the enemy might throw at them. As the hours passed, Jason found himself growing more determined. He had seen war destroy everything he held dear, but now, standing alongside Lissa, he felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. This was more than just a battle. This was a fight for the future. When the day of the attack arrived, Jason and Lissa stood side by side, ready to face whatever came their way. The enemy forces were massive, their ships descending on the planet in waves. The sky darkened as the sound of explosions echoed across the surface. But Jason was ready. With Lissa by his side, he knew they had a chance. He had always believed that humanity had a unique strength, a resilience that could not be broken. And now, as they stood together, Jason realized that it wasn't just humanity that had that strength. It was Lissa's people, too. It was the strength of all those who believed in something better. As the battle raged on, Jason and Lissa fought together, their bond unshakable. They had come so far, and no matter what happened, they would keep fighting for the future they believed in. The battle had raged for hours, the sound of explosions and laser fire filling the air. Jason and Lissa stood side by side, leading their forces with determination and grit. The enemy's attack was brutal, relentless, but there was something different about this fight. Jason could feel it. It wasn't just about survival anymore. This battle was about more than just holding on. It was about defending everything they had worked for, everything they had built together. Jason had seen his share of battles in the past. He had fought alongside countless soldiers, faced death more times than he cared to remember. But this felt different. This wasn't just about fighting to stay alive. This was a fight for a future, for hope. It was a fight for peace. Lissa had become the symbol of that hope. She had led her people through the darkest times, and now, standing beside her, Jason felt a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something greater, something that could change the course of their galaxy. The enemy forces were fierce, their ships descending from the sky like a swarm of locusts. But Jason and Lissa had a plan. They had prepared for this moment, knowing the attack was coming. The defenses were set, the troops ready. Jason's experience on the battlefield had been crucial, and Lissa's leadership had brought together a force that was stronger than the sum of its parts. "Stay focused," Jason shouted to his troops as they fought to hold their ground. "We've come too far to lose now." Lissa's voice echoed over the comms, steady and calm, even in the midst of the chaos. "Don't let them break through. Protect the civilians. Protect our future." Jason felt a surge of energy as he charged into the fray, his weapon steady in his hands. The enemy was overwhelming, but they were not invincible. He had seen what humanity and Lissa's people were capable of when they came together. This was their moment to prove it. Hours passed, the tide of the battle shifting back and forth, but they held their ground. The enemy was relentless, but Jason and Lissa's forces were even more determined. They fought with everything they had, not just for survival, but for a chance at a future free from the constant threat of war. The battle was far from over, but something began to shift. The enemy's attacks started to slow, their ships retreating as their forces faltered. Jason couldn't believe it. They were winning. Against all odds, they were winning. "Keep pushing," Jason shouted, his voice hoarse from the hours of combat. "We're almost there." Lissa's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "This isn't over until they're gone. Don't let up." Jason fought with everything he had, his movements automatic, each step driven by the knowledge that this was more than just a fight for survival. This was a fight for the future. For Lissa, for the galaxy. And then, just as the tide seemed to be turning in their favor, a new enemy ship appeared on the horizon. Jason's heart sank as he recognized the insignia. It was a warship unlike any he had seen before, its sleek, menacing design a symbol of power and destruction. The final blow, he thought. This was it. This was the enemy's last move. Lissa's voice crackled over the comms, steady and unwavering. "We'll face it together." This is the final test. Jason knew what had to be done. There was no more time for second-guessing, no more room for fear. They had come this far, and they weren't about to let it all slip away now. "Let's finish this," Jason said, determination burning in his chest. He turned to his troops. "We push forward. This is our last stand. We fight or we die trying." The final battle was brutal, the enemy ship unleashing a barrage of fire that shook the ground beneath them. But Jason and Lissa were unstoppable. Together, they led their forces, pushing through the enemy's defenses and striking at the heart of their warship. Jason could feel the weight of every moment, the weight of the choices that had brought him to this point. He had chosen to give up his escape pod for a stranger. He had chosen to fight to lead, to survive. And now, standing at the heart of this final battle, he knew that those choices had been worth it. This was where his journey had led him. This was where they would make their stand. The battle raged on, the final moments a blur of movement, sound, and explosions. But in the end, it was Jason and Lissa who stood victorious. The enemy warship had been destroyed, its forces scattered. The tide had finally turned. As the dust settled and the sound of battle faded, Jason and Lissa stood together, breathless and battered but alive. They had won. Against all odds, they had won. Lissa turned to Jason, a look of exhaustion and relief on her face. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "We actually did it." Jason nodded, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He had no words to express how he felt. All the pain, all the loss, all the fear, they had made it through. They had created something worth fighting for. "Yeah," Jason said, his voice hoarse. "We did." The war was over. The enemy had been defeated, and now it was time to rebuild. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jason felt hopeful. He had spent so many years fighting just to survive, just to make it through another day. But now, with Lissa by his side, he knew that survival was only the beginning. The galaxy had been scarred by war, but there was still hope. There was still a chance for a future. And together, Jason and Lissa would make sure it was a future worth fighting for. As they looked out over the battlefield, the sounds of victory ringing in the distance, Jason felt a sense of peace settle over him. The battle was won, but the real work was just beginning. They would rebuild together, and this time they would do it right. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jason was no longer afraid.